A former chairman of the Joint Chiefs and 2 former Supreme Allied Commanders of NATO, among others, lay out how it has come to the point Russia felt it could invade Ukraine. Washington. This week Secretary of State Antony Blinken wrapped up his tour of NATO eastern flank countries Poland, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, hoping to reassure nervous allies. Russia's naked war of aggression against nearby Ukraine and its constant threats and bullying of its neighbors explain why all eyes in the transatlantic alliance are now fixed not only on Ukraine, but also on NATO's vulnerable Baltic members, where Blinken was met with a warning on his arrival in Estonia. Frankly, deterrence is no longer enough and we need forward defense here in place because otherwise it will be too late, Mr. Secretary, Estonian President Gitanas Nauseda told Blinken bluntly. Putin will not stop in Ukraine if he will not be stopped. In fact, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is just the latest and boldest move by President Vladimir Putin to forcibly impose a privileged sphere of influence on his democratic neighbors. As far back as 2007 he launched one of the largest state-sponsored cyberattacks ever against Estonia, paralyzing the country's internet for the crime of daring to move a statue of a Soviet soldier from the center of the capital. In 2008 Russian forces invaded Georgia and occupied 2 breakaway republics because that country expressed an intent to join NATO. When Ukraine tilted west in 2014, Russia forcibly annexed Crimea and launched the separatist conflict in Donbass. More recently, Moscow has helped quell democratic uprisings and prop up dictators in Belarus in 2020, and Kazakhstan earlier this year. As Russian military forces continue trying to bomb Ukraine into submission, it is certainly not lost on U.S. military leaders that Putin's recently stated demands that NATO halt its expansion and remove military forces and infrastructure from its eastern flank countries suggest where his ire and ambition may be focused next. In the harsh light of the new Cold War that is descending over Europe, it's also increasingly clear that NATO leaders for years wrote checks and IOUs with the alliance's expansion eastward that its steadily dwindling defense capabilities couldn't cover. And Vladimir Putin noticed. If Putin was willing to launch a full-scale invasion of another country on the doorstep of NATO, we have to be candid with ourselves that he perceived some signal from the United States and NATO that made him think he could get away with it, and we need to understand those signals that are eroding the alliance's deterrence, Martin Dempsey, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, told Breaking Defense. Those signals likely include a steady reduction of U.S. forces in Europe and declining military readiness and capability among European allies, a 20-year U.S. preoccupation with counterterrorism in the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, a publicly announced U.S. pivot to Asia to cope with the challenge of a rising China, an over-reliance on the threat of economic sanctions as an adequate deterrence, years of former President Donald Trump browbeating NATO over inadequate burden sharing and threats to abandon the alliance, and the Biden administration's chaotic military retreat from Afghanistan last year. Intuitively, I think it's unlikely that Putin would have ordered the invasion of Ukraine if he hadn't perceived that the NATO alliance was more vulnerable than in the past, and that vulnerability was growing over time. So lesson number 1 to me is that we need a reinforced U.S. military presence in Europe, and the right kind of political statements about the value of the alliance to strengthen its deterrent value, said Dempsey. Putin has also made clear that he considers himself a historic figure in the mold of Peter the Great, noted Dempsey, and he's intent on re-establishing Russia's sphere of influence, including in the Baltics. In Georgia in 2008, Crimea in 2014 and today in Ukraine, he has showed us the lengths he is willing to go to achieve a new Russian empire, Dempsey said. So as Maya Angelou once said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Putin has repeatedly showed us who he is, and shame on us if we fail to believe him.